One of the things I want to do this morning is give an example of how to evaluate a photograph. One of the samples I'm going to be using is a MUFON case that I worked on sometime about a year or so ago. That's an excellent example of how we can analyze information from multiple avenues. On my computer I have a program called ExifReader, and the reason I like this program is, number one, it's free. Also, it's relatively simple to use. What I'm going to do is go up into the upper left-hand corner of my screen where it goes to has the open option, and I have a fairly in-depth system at home, and I created a special training file for this example. The training file I have I called Investigator Training Materials, and I've created two folders currently underneath of it. The one contains the raw image, which is the unedited image from the witness. Now, to me, this is a critical part to have, is the unedited image. A number of times individuals may go in and grab the image and open up with a program like Photoshop or something along those lines, and they start altering the original image and destroy some of the data inside of the photograph. If I go into my raw image folder, I have a file called 39860 submitter, which is the witness's submitted photograph. I downloaded that from the CMS system, and when I open it up, the purpose of the ExifReader is it displays the digital information within the photograph. I like to look at this before I even begin reviewing the investigation material on here, and then I make notes off of what I find within the photograph. This can be used to go back to compare to the actual CMS report. When I open this one up, it shows a very small thumbnail image of the photograph up here, of which I can either save information, save the thumbnail, or if I click on View Image, this shows the original image that the witness submitted. I have a little slider bar up here I can move back and forth, and I can drop down the size so we can get the whole image on the screen. Once I do that, we can see in the upper left-hand corner we have this streak going across. But it's kind of barely visible, but over here on the right-hand side we also have a very small diagonal image moving across this way. This is what the witness actually reported. This was another image that just happened to be in the picture the witness captured on here. The coloration on here I can see is a brown, almost what I call a sepia tone color. And I'm not going to worry about any colorations, anything else right now. All I'm really concerned about is the information regarding what type of camera the witness has, the shutter speeds, and etc. If I go back to the metafile information, it shows me that the witness has a Canon camera, a Canon EOS Rebel 2T. It shows the date and time on the photograph. The exposure is 8 seconds. The F number is f1.8, and the ISO speed rating is 100. So that you know what these numbers mean if you're unfamiliar with them, the ISO number down here is the level of sensitivity of your camera to the available light. Typically it's measured in numbers. A lower number represents lower sensitivity to available light, while a higher number means more sensitivity. The problem is, though, if you set it for more sensitivity, that does come at a cost. As the ISO number increases, so does the grain or noise in the picture on there. ISO 100 is a fairly low setting. ISA 1600 is a much higher setting, and you would see a significant amount of difference between the two, between the quality of the image. ISO 100 would be relatively sharp. ISO 1600 would be extremely grainy. One of the other values up here in this case was going back to our shutter speed. This one shows a shutter speed up here of 8 seconds. Shutter speed is the length of time the shutter's opened to expose light into the camera sensor. Shutter speeds are typically measured in fractions of a second. When they're under a second, they're typically in a fractional form. Slow shutter speeds allow more light into the sensor and are used for low light or night photography. Now, this individual was shooting in a very low level light situation. It appears as though he's relatively familiar with what he's doing, and his camera is set for an 8-second shutter speed. Now, the problem with an 8-second shutter speed is objects moving in front of the camera will be distorted on there. You may have, in this case, the image being blurred. You may actually see the object moving across the screen as a line. Typically, shutter speeds, you're going to be running, in this case, anywhere from 125th to 150th of a second. Those would be typically in daytime photography. Those and shutter speeds faster than that are fast enough to actually freeze the image and keep it from being distorted or picking up a blur potentially. The last number in here is the aperture setting. Now, the aperture is a hole basically within the lens. This hole is what the light travels through to get into the camera body. The larger the hole, the more light passes to the camera sensor. The aperture also controls another critical value called depth of field. Depth of field is the portion of the scene that remains sharp. If the camera aperture is very small, the depth of field is very large. While if the aperture is very large, the depth of field is very small. In this case, we have an f-stop reading of f1.8. This is a very large aperture setting. That means that the depth of field is going to be very short. The thing that the witness has in this case, in this particular image, is he's focused on infinity. But on the other hand, if you're focusing on an object, let's say for example 10 feet in front of you, there would be a certain amount of the image that would be out of focus before or after that 10-foot distance on there. Going down farther, I see that the witness's flash did not fire on his camera. And I'm just reviewing some of the other basic information about here. It also gives me the focal length of the lens, which could be used later on to also determine potentially depth of field. But in this case, the primary area we're going to focus on today, area we're going to work on, is the make, model of camera, the exposure time setting, the aperture, and then also looking at the ISO shutter speed. What we can do with this information is I like to take this information and do a printout of it, or better yet, save a copy of it electronically to my computer. This way I can use this information in my report itself. I've got the ability up here under the information. If I go into the information tab, I can click on save as text. And this shows my current file that I'm in, which is the image with the raw photograph. It already started using down here, user submitted file, placing a TXT on the end of it, creating a text file. And if I save this, all the information we have right now has been output to a text file for reference. Going back to our original image now, if we go into the photograph, we can see in this case a light streak, and this light streak was the one that was going across the upper left-hand corner of the picture. The light streak was going across, and here's just something out of my gut instinct. Also a little knowledge on thinking about the mechanics of a camera. In this image, I can barely see this little line kind of squiggles and then straightens out. The object that he captured right here to me is moving from right to left. This little squiggly line in here would represent the image pressing the button on the camera, activating the shutter. That small amount of movement in your hand would cause the camera to potentially shake. Another thing I'm noticing with this line being as extremely straight as it is, and combined with a exposure time of 8 seconds, more than likely this camera was mounted to a tripod when the individual took the photograph. The tripod formed a rigid base. He pushed a shutter, had very slight camera shake, and we can see the object moving through the picture. If I go back to the other side, this is the other image that the witness captured. And I don't know how we can see this on the video. This is a new experiment for me. But on the video, I can see, or a picture I should say, I can see that there's almost like a small string of lights where we've got white, red intermixed. And it appears almost like a snake-like image, except it's stretched out straight. And around the lights, it almost appears like something almost translucent. This one, I wouldn't want to predict which direction this light is moving on here, but this is what the originally caught the witness's eye in the photograph. So this is my first step. I went back, I got my metafile information, I have a time and date within a photograph, I have an exposure setting, I have an f-stop rating, I have an idea of the ISO film rating that it was using, and this gives me my first stage of what I plan on doing in my investigation. What we're going to be doing next is we're going to be continuing on. I know a number of you may not have the advantage of using other computerized software. I just happen to be the major computer geek out here. And the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to take my raw image, open up in Adobe Photoshop, and I'm going to review the photograph and then also go back and potentially color correct that same image. We'll see you at the next level.